Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and we're going to provide an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, to begin with, we know that when we're below it, and especially in a downtrend, you are better off thinking of this thing as a bear market resistance band. And it's basically telling you, as we've said for about 4 months now, that Bitcoin is in fact in a bear market, right? We are in fact in a bear market, and the sooner we accept that, the better off we'll all be, right? I mean, what I've said before is by the time the last bull capitulates and calls it a bear market, the bear market will in fact be over. So, as of this week, the 20-week SMA is now coming in at around 40.3K, and the 21-week EMA is at 41.3K. So it ranges now from approximately 40.3K to 41.3K. Now, this is a line in the sand that not only would we need to get above, but we would also need to hold as support for the macro structure of this market to change. We have just come off 6 red weekly candles in a row for the first time ever, at least on this chart. There are some exchanges where I believe do show 6 red candles in a row. Like in phases in here, you can imagine this was 5. So there's some exchanges where maybe this candle is red, and some of the stuff up here might be red as well in some exchanges. But at least on the index that I'm using, we've never actually had 6 red weeklies in a row. And, we're now starting a 7th one. So, this week just started, so we'll see where ultimately it ends up. But I'd like to say, as we've said before, the main things you need to consider in these market conditions. Number one, Bitcoin is in a bear market. What does that mean? You have to shift your focus, right? Buying the dip doesn't work so much, especially for altcoins when we're in a bear market. It just doesn't, because the idea is the asset's more likely going to go down. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have Bitcoin. I do. It doesn't mean that I'm not occasionally buying it. I am. But I do think that there is a good chance the market will remain bearish for more months to come. Okay? And the reason I say that is because of not only the fact that we are still systematically getting rejected off of the bull market support band. Every time we go up to it, it's just resistance, right? And if we get above it, we just fall back through it like the following week or two. So we need to understand that this is bear market structure through and through. It's a bear market, right? Call it what it is. Now, one of the things I've said before is there's some bulls holding on to the mentality of, well, technically we're putting in higher lows. And I said that's not going to hold. That's very likely not going to hold. And if you wait until it doesn't hold to declare it a bear market, then you're kind of getting late to the game at that point. Now we're in the stage where I think the last bulls will sort of hold their ground, because now technically we could just say, yeah, we're still above 30K. Okay, so technically speaking, it's range bound, and technically they could be right. I don't know. I mean, they could be right, but I would argue that given the sort of the macroeconomic conditions we're facing today, given the hawkish Fed, whether we hold it at 29K or not is somewhat irrelevant. This was a bear market. This is a bear market. We are still living in a bear market. And one of the things that I think is worth noting, as we've said before, is that usually when Bitcoin drops below the 50-week SMA, it's only a matter of time before we consolidate around the 100-week SMA, and then it's only a matter of time before we capitulate to the 200-week SMA. This isn't the first time this has happened, so I think it's worth considering that going below the 50 takes us to the 100, which ultimately leads to a 200-week capitulation. Going below the 50 takes us to the 100, which normally leads to a 200-week capitulation. Going below the 50 leads us to consolidating around the 100, which normally leads to you guessed it, a 200-week SMA capitulation. So I don't want to be deterministic about anything other than I do think Bitcoin trends higher with time. But if you're just looking at what has happened in the past, this is what has happened. And if you're going to sit there and throw something at me about, well, we've never had this many institutions or fundamentals or blah, 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 it doesn't matter. When the markets are risk off, it just simply does not matter. People behave irrationally. it's the same thing when we go to new highs, right? I mean, it's the same thing when you have some type of like blow off top, is that during a blow off top type scenario, what ends up happening is people are irrational, and it just doesn't make sense that we're going that high. It's when we went to the 0.9 to 1 risk band on the risk metric that we have, we hit that right here at 58k. We went to the highest risk level. It doesn't make sense from a, from like a fair value perspective or from a fundamental perspective why you would buy it at that price, because it was only $3,800 like a year before, but people still buy it there. Okay. So, in the same way the market can be irrational to the upside, it can also be irrational to the downside and lead us to prices lower than what you think is theoretically possible. Okay. It doesn't really mean that Bitcoin should be at that price or it makes sense for it to be there. It's just that it sometimes goes there, and it feels pretty bad when it does. Okay. I distinctly remember when I lived through this thing in 2014. And I mean, I was just schmuck buying all the altcoin dips throughout this entire phase. By the time we were done here, I didn't have a dime left to put into the market because I'd already put it all in. And then I just sat through here, basically looking at all these cheap things, thinking it was going to keep going down, and it didn't. And we ended up rallying back up. And then eventually, I got back into into the money at some point when it rallied back up. But it was difficult navigating that thing down. And then in 2018, a lot of people watching this channel, and if you followed me since say 2019 when I started the channel, you probably lived through this. There were a lot of us, including myself, that thought there was a good chance the 100-week SMA was going to hold. I don't really necessarily, to be completely honest, I don't really remember specifically saying, okay, we have to hold it the 100-week. What I more so remember thinking is we've been at 6K for so long and it's holding such great support. Surely we can't go below it. I still had learned my lesson though from over here. So I made sure to stack some cash ahead of time so that if we did go below, I could take advantage of it. And I remember buying Bitcoin many times at around 3,100, 3,400, 3,800. And I remember every single week, like I would go in to buy some Bitcoin. Actually, that's not true. It was every month. I was buying it every month then. And I remember going in every month and kind of hoping it would stay down here for as long as possible because I did not think that it would go, I did not think it would actually go any lower. Here, I stacked cash in case we went lower. Here, I did not because I thought there was a good chance that was the bottom. And so I put in most of everything I had. I mean, I think maybe I had like a 3 or 4% cash position. Kind of irresponsible, to be completely honest, how little cash I had, but it ended up working out. Okay. Now, today, we're sort of in a similar circumstance. I mean, we dropped below the 50. We're consolidating around the 100. What comes next, right? The drop below it. And that already happened. We're already below the 100-week moving average. You could argue the capitulation maybe has already begun, right? I mean, look at what happened in 2018. Once we had that weekly close below, look at what happened the following week. Negative 29%. Now, I don't know if it's going to play out the exact same way because I mean, there's some evidence to suggest that if we are playing out this structure, we're somewhere, not as far down this thing. But if you look at this, a negative 29% move, if that were to happen, I mean, you're talking about a $24,000 Bitcoin. Now, are we saying that has to happen? No, I'm not. What I am saying is that a lot of people in 2018 didn't believe we could go back to the 200-week moving average. And that's what happened. And that's what ended up happening. So, funny enough, I mean, again, so 2014, I didn't prepare. 2018, I sort of prepared. Now I'm very much prepared. So there's part of me that thinks that maybe it won't happen now that I'm actually extremely prepared for it. But if it does happen, then, you need to be prepared for it. And the only way to be prepared for it is to stop YOLOing everything in on every altcoin dip. Okay? You just can't, I mean, look, there does exist a scenario where Bitcoin gets back above the bull market support band and holds it as support despite everyone's bearish expectations, and then maybe altcoins would rally. But Bitcoin has to show a lot of strength before that's going to happen, right? I mean, like, there's just simply no way I think that we get out of this thing without either Bitcoin showing strength first or Bitcoin capitulating. When I mean that, I say altcoins. Like, altcoins aren't going to get out of this mess without Bitcoin either capitulating or showing strength. And The path of least resistance is I still think down over the next few months. Now, given the fact that we've just gone down 6 weeks in a row, I'd like to believe there's at least some part of us that could bounce off of the summer lows. And we've more or less already gone close to those. I mean, I made a video earlier today talking about why I thought that we'll probably bounce somewhere between 27K to 33K. So basically think $30,000 plus or minus a few K. I think there's a good chance we'll see some type of a bounce where then we revisit the 200-day moving average. But if it doesn't happen and we just capitulate straight down, it's a huge opportunity for Bitcoin. Even if we have to spend a while sort of, playing in the sandbox down here, a lot of times you'll see rallies off the 200-week SMA. I mean, it's what you normally see. Whether it's sustained in the short term or not is kind of irrelevant. I mean, you will often see rallies off of that level. So, I come to you again, every single week we do these videos. I come to you again saying, guys, look, we are in a bear market. Bitcoin is getting systematically rejected by the bull market support band. It's getting systematically rejected by the 200-day moving average, right? The Fed remains hawkish. Inflation is soaring. The Fed can't pivot until inflation gets under control. Could it get under control in the coming months? Maybe, and maybe the Fed will pivot, but they haven't pivoted yet, and markets haven't priced it in happening yet because we're still looking very bearish here. So, with all this taken into consideration, how do you look at the market and say, oh yeah, like this thing's going to start, putting in a new all-time high in the next few months? Like, I don't think it's going to. Okay, I don't think so. So, I think, the thing to consider here with the 200-day, as I said before, is that a lot of times what happens with the 200-day is you will get multiple tests of it, right? So we got one in May of 2018. We had another one in July. We almost made it there in September, okay? Here, we made it there in April, okay? So perhaps we'll bounce back up in June. If it were to repeat this sort of thing, it means going down and putting in a lower low, so going below the prior wick, meaning it would mean Bitcoin going below $33,000, okay? And from there, getting some type of a bounce back up, maybe to the 200-day moving average at around $40,000 or something, okay? That's what it would mean. But if this continues to play out, then it might just simply get rejected again, right? Like it might just get rejected again. And we continue to play the same game until finally Bitcoin either musters up the strength to get back above it, despite everyone's bearish expectations, or we capitulate, right? Those are the main two things I think to consider right now. So with all this in mind, I've said this for months now. Cash is king. Alts, super risky, right? Alts remain super risky. If you're stuck in a habit of YOLOing every altcoin dip, consider that if Bitcoin remains in a bear market, what if it remains in a bear market for 3 more months or 6 more months, right? Alts are just going to get wrecked if that happens. So you need to consider some risk management, I think. I know these videos, they really do elicit certain types of responses, and naturally when we're going down, I think people tend to like it because that's kind of what they think anyways. And if we bounce, which we're probably going to bounce at some point within the next couple of weeks, then everyone will sort of troll all the bears and say, who bought the dip? But the truth, it's a serious matter, guys. The truth is that the market looks very bearish. Okay, the Nasdaq looks very bearish. The S&P looks very bearish. The Fed is hawkish. This is a thing you have to consider, that if history plays out again and Bitcoin capitulates to the 200-week moving average, which, by the way, is where the fair value regression band is, which is where it capitulated last cycle as well, right? If it comes here over the next few months, don't say you weren't warned, okay? I mean, this is a fairly clear setup for this to just play out like it played in the past, So if this happens, or whether we go down here for a while and then it happens, however it plays out, if it happens, it would likely represent a nice opportunity on Bitcoin. If it doesn't happen, then Bitcoin has a hell of a lot of work to do to prove that it's going to hold the line up here. Now, some people have said, well, since we only went very briefly into it up here, is it possible that we only briefly go into it over here? Anything's possible, and in fact, we'll probably be debating that for months to come if we don't capitulate. I mean, if Bitcoin comes down here to the summer lows like we think, and then it bounces back up, then we still might argue that there's still going to be a lot of people that are not going to call this a bear market, right? So like if Bitcoin does something like this where it comes down to the to the summer low, maybe below it or something, bounces back up, and then we do something like this, there's still going to be people calling it a bull market, you know? And then what'll probably cause them to call it a bear market would be that final capitulation, right? But it's like, at that point, what's the point in calling it a bear market? I mean, at that point, the bear market could be over for all we know. If you think about stuff like the weekly RSI, we're approaching oversold conditions. From the RSI point of view, the bear market or the bear market started in January of 2021. Seems kind of weird, doesn't it? Not really. You go look at the hodl waves on chain data. That's where long-term sellers started to take profits. I was taking profits at 42K. I have no problem admitting it. I mean, I took some at the higher risk levels as well when it went to like above 50 and close to 60. I was taking profits there too, but I started before we went up to this final distribution phase because I didn't know we were going to make it there. Just like in 2019, I didn't know how far we were going to make it up. So I look at this market today and say, well, if we capitulate, it's the same thing. Okay, it's the same exact thing, and you need to be prepared for it if it happens. I'm not saying this stuff just to spread fear. And I see, in a lot of the tweets and stuff I put out, anytime I say something bearish, people say bottom signal. But look, I mean, I don't put it out there without the thought of how it would make people perceive me. I understand that you want me to be bullish and that we want to see this thing go higher. But we need to recognize that the markets remain risk off right now, and that there is a good chance Bitcoin sees some type of capitulation to the 200-week moving average eventually. Whether it happens now or not is somewhat irrelevant. I mean, I think there's a good chance we'll see some type of bounce off of somewhere maybe 27 to 33K. But if that doesn't happen and we capitulate, it usually is a huge opportunity. Okay. So you keep an eye on the 200-week SMA. It's currently just below $22,000. Don't tell me it can't happen. I see these comments all the time. They say, "Oh, Ben it can't happen." What do you think the people at 6K said back in 2018, right? What do you think the people at $400 said back in 2014? I was a schmuck who didn't think it would go below. When I thought it was 1,000, I didn't think we were going to drop, right? Like I thought we were just going to keep going higher. That was me. That was me back then. When we dropped back here, I was like, oh, can't believe it dropped this low. Gotta put it all in the market. We kept going down. By the time we got here, I mean, I didn't even have that much left to put in. So by the time we got here, I didn't have anything to put in. So don't make the mistake that prior investors have made and assume that something can't happen just because you haven't seen the price. Okay? The people that got in during this mania phase over here ultimately paid the price. During this one, they ultimately paid the price, and it went lower than prices they had seen. I think it's, there's a good chance it already happened to some degree when we went to 29K. We could easily go to 29K again. Don't tell me it can't happen. In a risk-off environment where the Fed doesn't care about your portfolio and altcoins are losing value quicker than you can basically keep up with it, yeah, it can happen, right? It can happen. So remember, this is not new. We've experienced this before, okay? It's not new. The way to get through it is what I've said for a long time. Bitcoin, altcoins are risky. What I mean by that is Bitcoin will give you enough exposure to the asset class, I think. Altcoins are incredibly risky, and you need to have cash. That's how you get through it, okay? And then eventually we'll see some type of bounce. I think a lot of people are worried, like, we're going to capitulate and then they're going to miss the bottom. When does that ever happen? I mean, other than March of 2020, which is a fluke scenario, when has that ever happened, right? When we go down there, you have a few months. I mean, you look at what happened over here. You had a few months. It's not like if we go down to those levels, you're probably going to have a few months, right? Like it's not like it's just going to be here one day and gone the next. It would probably be a little bit of reaccumulation before we can ultimately trend higher. So do consider this as a possibility. Okay. Can we go below the 200? We've had wicks below it before, sure. Sure it could happen. There's a 300-week estimate right there. It comes in at the bottom. Normally, if we test the 300, if you extend it here, it happens on the second test of the 200, right? So first test, I guess this was a second test. Maybe this is like a third test or something, but normally it comes later. So by the time you test the 300, it's actually like higher than where the 200 was when you tested that. That's what happened here as well. It might not look like it because the regression line has a way of sort of distorting it, but you can see the 200-week estimate when we tested it was lower than the 300-week when we tested that. So the 200-week estimate right now is at 22K. The 300-week is at 16K. It's just where it is. I don't control where it is. That's where it is. So the 200-week right now is at 21,862. So that's where we currently are. And if this thing breaks down and comes down here, I imagine you would see some type of consolidation, perhaps a bounce, maybe further consolidation a little bit later, and then maybe we'll trend higher again. But right now, you need to be cautious. You need to be on the defensive. You need to recognize that this through and through is a bear market. And let me ask you this. If you won't call it a bear market now, when Bitcoin is down 50% and all coins are down 70 and 80%, when would you call it a bear market, right? I mean, if this is a bull market, it's one of the worst bull markets I've seen because my portfolio is down a lot. So be patient. Understand this is nothing new. We've seen this before. The story has been told 1,000 times at this point. You need to be patient. You need to be defensive. And you need to have cash on hand. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe. We have the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.